It's crucial, I think, to make the distinction between myths and disinformation, and it's one thing that drives me insane when I watch TV and the journalists say misinformation when they mean disinformation. Misinformation is an accident or a mistake. It's when somebody believes something false, but there's no intentionality behind it. It just happens to be false, and maybe if they heard the facts, they'd change their mind. Disinformation is a lie. Disinformation is when someone shares a falsehood intentionally with another person for the purpose of getting them to believe that falsehood because it benefits them. That is to say, the person who's sharing the disinformation, not the person who believes it. And that's what makes disinformation so virulent, and it's why journalists need, I think, to do a better job of marking the distinction, because otherwise you're just treating it like it was a natural disaster. You know, think of when there's a hurricane or a typhoon, what do? Oh, you just put your head down. There's nothing you can do. But if it's disinformation, there is something that you can do. Why it's a massive problem? Because it's so virulent. I mean, the lies, people have always lied throughout history, but what makes our era right now so we're so in danger, both for science and democracy, is that people now have the capacity to share lies through partisan media, through social media. Just think of how many times you've seen disinformation or misinformation that you found out later maybe on the internet. Used to be that people could lie and they didn't have an audience. Now people have websites, they have an audience, and literally the lie can get halfway around the world before the truth can get its shoes on. That's what makes it so dangerous.
And you mentioned social media, and obviously we'll be getting to that later, particularly with Joe. But Micah, can you just talk us through, so where we see something online that's disinformation, what's actually going on in our brains, and what are the psychological processes that make it so compelling?
Sure. Yeah, so what's really critical for what's happening in our minds and brains is about how we make sense of the world, right? So we make sense of the world with explanations that are embedded in narratives, right? So narratives provide explanations for how the world works, such as, they communicate the cause and effect of different events, right? A leads to B, leads to C. And often when we're first hearing something new, now this is a situation where you haven't already sort of been drawn into a sort of web of lies, let's say. Let's say you're just sort of first coming across something and it sort of seems like a potentially reasonable explanation for something, right? And we end up evaluating it based on how all the pieces sort of fit together in the moment of hearing about it, like the way you would follow a story. We don't necessarily think, I don't actually know nearly enough to understand what this person's talking about, or sort of do really critical evaluate. We often think, we can just train people with critical thinking, but we don't sort of necessarily just jump right into understanding how to even evaluate things. I'll give you an example, right? So recently the RFK Jr., a fringe presidential candidate in the US, has been spreading a lot of disinformation about vaccines, right? And he sort of talks about how there's sort of mercury as in the preservatives in vaccines, and this mercury is what is, we're giving these to kids, and we all know mercury is a toxin, we all know mercury is bad, right? And then this is what's explaining the rise in ADHD and autism and all these other things. And when you're sitting there and you're listening to him talk about it, it's picking up on little bits of knowledge that we have, right? We know mercury is bad, right? And then the rest of it, and we sort of know about ADHD increasing or whatever, but it's sort of putting it together in a way that isn't actually sound, and we don't think, and we don't even realize we don't really know what he's talking about, and that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So in the sense that, the form of mercury that's the preservative in the vaccine isn't the same form of mercury that is the toxin in the environment. And the dose sizes are totally different. And so it's actually not dangerous at all. And they even banned these preservatives anyway, like decades ago, just in case, right? But we listen to the story that he's telling, and it seems very compelling. because who doesn't want to help kids, right? The kids are in danger. This is a problem. Who doesn't want to help kids? And so when we're following that, when we're following his story, and all the pieces fit, and we don't think, oh, is there some element of science I don't understand here that would actually disprove this? We sort of get bought into it. And so it relates to this general phenomena where we often navigate the world. We don't sort of realize how little we know about almost everything. We go around the world feeling like, because we navigate the world, it's like, I get how this works. So for example, you can ask people, do you know how a toilet works? And they go, yes. And then you go, how does it work? And they go, well, I hit the button, and then everything goes away, right? And so you sort of realize that we very rarely actually interrogate understanding of things. And besides like the one thing that we're really expert in, right, we don't really understand very much. And that's even before we get into all the issues of how people use these stories to dispel, to sort of break trust and blame people, right? Because there's also the kids are the victims, the pharmaceutical companies are doing this to them, right? And so that's also very compelling.